Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board is now called to order. First, I will call the roll. Board Member Broad.
Present.
Board Member Flores.
Present.
Board Member Hall.
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Lightstone.
Present.
Wonderful. Also present today from our staff is our Executive Secretary, Santiago Avila Gomez, as well as our staff member, Devika Ganawardena, who are helping provide technical support during the meeting. We do have interpretive services today, so even if you can hear me now, please go in your Zoom application and on the bottom right, there's a language button and select your preferred language, either English or Spanish. This will ensure that you have good audio quality throughout the meeting. I will now pause and give a moment so that can be shared in Spanish as well.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a nuestra Junta del Consejo de Relaciones Laborales Agrícola. Para esta junta tenemos servicios de interpretación para personas que están usando Zoom en su computadora o teléfono. En este momento, por favor, elija su idioma preferido, sea español o inglés. Hacia el abajo de su pantalla se ve un glóbulo que dice interpretación. Haga clic en ese glóbulo para escoger su idioma. Por favor, escoja un idioma aunque no quiera los servicios de interpretación. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Santiago. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping matters. We do have a busy agenda today. So we'll first start with the open session or business portion of our meeting. We then have an informational panel today on providing some information on mental health issues for farm workers. And then at the close of the panel, prior to going into closed session, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. Then we'll go into closed session, and then later today, we have our regional directors meeting at 2 p.m. We do have limited capabilities of managing audio during the meeting. So we do ask that if you are not speaking, you please put your phone or device on mute. And as we get to the public comment section, we will first go to those who have indicated they wish to make a public comment in the queue. If you wish to make a public comment, you can email Santiago or Devika. Their emails are on the agenda, which is on our homepage, or you can indicate in the chat feature of Zoom or using the raised hand function. We do ask that you refrain from making substantive comments in the chat. Please just use it as a way to indicate that you need assistance or that you wish to make a public comment. When you do make public comment, please provide your name and your organization if applicable. And again, we do have limited capabilities, so we do ask for your patience. And if you have an issue, please let us know and we will do our best to make sure every comment is heard. These instructions and contact information are also available again on our agenda. All right, turning now, we'll go to the first agenda item, which is to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting on September 28th. May I have a motion?
So moved.
To approve the minutes.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Wonderful. Okay, next is the chair's report, and we have several items today. I want to take a moment. On Monday, the state commemorated for the 4th year in a row Indigenous Peoples Day. And that's a day to honor and reflect upon the contributions of the First Peoples to our state, to our nation, and frankly, to our organization and the work that we do every day. I believe it's critically important that we not just engage in some kind of pro forma, hey, this was this day, but actually take a moment to pause, reflect, and learn about these contributions as we are still grappling with the destructive history of colonialism and the impact of systemic racism that is left on our society as it impacts various aspects of our work and our communities. As this board has discussed before, the state's agricultural workforce has a significant and growing Indigenous population across its workforce. And it is our duty, our responsibility to ensure that we are providing culturally competent and language accessible materials and information as we proceed through our work and giving information to workers as we investigate our cases and provide information to the public. Various organizations, including our own City of Sacramento, have started to engage in a practice of opening official meetings with a land acknowledgement ceremony. And I thought, in recognition of this day, well, it was 2 days ago, I want to join in this practice today and acknowledge and honor Sacramento's indigenous peoples and tribal lands. To the original people of this land, the Nisenan people, the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, Patwin-Winton peoples, and the people of the Wilton Rancheria, which is Sacramento's only federally recognized tribe. I do acknowledge that we have members across the state today, and these tribes may not be reflected, or we may not be reflecting the lands where they are based. But I do want to acknowledge and honor the Native people who came before us and still walk beside us today on these ancestral lands by choosing to gather together in the active practice of acknowledgement and appreciation for Sacramento's indigenous people's history, contributions, and lives. So thank you for joining with me today in that land acknowledgement. Turning now to a landmark event that happened right at the conclusion of our last meeting 2 weeks ago. Governor Gavin Newsom walked just a few blocks from here to one of several vigils that were being held across the state to advocate for passage of AB 2183, a bill that is, I believe, the most significant changes to our act in the act's history since its initial enactment. He signed that bill, and as we know, there was much discussion. It makes several sweeping changes to our laws that will be discussed in a bit more depth by our Chief Board Counsel, Todd Ratchin, during the legislative report. But I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the hard work, to acknowledge the advocacy of the workers and supporters in making those changes. Our charge as a board is to oversee and administer the implementation of the ALRA and act as stewards of both the act as well as the policies. And the primary policy principle of the act is to ensure and protect worker choice and workers' abilities to come together and advocate for their working conditions, whatever that choice may be. This is an act for workers, for farm workers working together. I see our responsibility every day, and even more so now, I feel a great responsibility that we work to implement these provisions correctly, that we ensure that they are easy for workers to understand, to use, and to access, so that we ensure that the responsibilities and obligations of employers and unions are easily understood, and that everyone has a clear understanding of what the law is and can have full faith that we will administer the law fairly and justly. I think we all take this responsibility incredibly seriously, and I look forward to working with our staff to, as we work to put out guidance for the public so that we can provide clarity and greater understanding, and also see what potential changes this brings to our act. There is, as I noted at the outset, the governor did indicate that this was based on some additional changes being made in the next legislative session. The exact timing of when that will occur remains to be seen, but regardless, we will work to implement the law fairly and correctly and provide as much information to the public as we can. And I want to thank all the staff who provided technical assistance and answered various questions in the development of both this bill as well as the cleanup. So thank you very much. This concludes the chair's report. The next agenda item is our executive's officer's report with Santiago Avila Gomez. Santiago.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Hasid and members of the board. Today's report is short. It has 3 items occurring since our last public board meeting. The first is a complaint settlement involving Valley Ag Holdings, LLC, case number 2018 CE 015 VIS. And the general counsel and parties entered into an informal bilateral settlement agreement, which was filed on September 30th. Since our last meeting, there was an administrative order that issued in St. Supri Inc. doing business as St. Supri Vineyards and Winery, and that is ALRB Admin Order 2022-06-P, which indicates that it's a presidential admin order that issued on September 28th, which was shortly after our last meeting. The case number there is 2022 CE 015 SAL, and the order granted to General Counsel's request for subpoena enforcement. Finally, there's a pending matter before the board, and that's Sonoma Cho LLC doing business as Flora Terra 2022 CE 003 SAL et al. And that is a proposed formal bilateral settlement agreement that was filed on September 16th. That concludes my report. And I wish to also mention that this report, along with the other reports, are available on our website under the meetings tab. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Santiago. I do not have any questions. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Okay, great. Next, we will turn to agenda item number 5, the litigation report with our Chief Board Counsel, Todd Ratchen. Todd.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Just one update to report since the last public meeting in the Synagro Farms matter pending in the 2nd District. Synagro filed its opening brief on October 4th, and the board's respondent brief will be due November 8th.
Thank you, Todd. Next is our General Counsel's report with General Counsel Julie Montgomery. Julie.
Good morning, Chair Hasid and board members. Just a couple of quick announcements regarding some outreach presentations for today. On September 30th, our General Counsel staff provided a worker training in Spanish virtually for a farm worker ambassador program hosted by the Central California Environmental Justice Network, CCEJN. And they had a good attendance of a group of farm workers who are gathering information and going out and providing that information to others in their communities. So we hope to have reached a number of people even beyond those that attended the training regarding the ALRB and what services we provide and what rights we enforce. We also have been conducting office hours in outlying communities that are harder for farm workers to access the ALRB at. So we are going out to them. On October 5th, we had staff providing in-person assistance to walk-ins at a community-based organization, MyCop in Santa Maria. We also had staff providing assistance to workers through a community-based organization in Coachella and Riverside County called TODEC. And we are continuing to expand that model in other areas as well. And then finally, on October 7th, our staff participated virtually in a Ventura County Health Collaborative stakeholder meeting. And that concludes my report for today.
Thank you, Julie. I don't have any questions. Do any of my colleagues? Okay, next agenda item is the administrative report with our Chief Administrative Officer, Brian Doherty. Brian?
Good morning. I don't really have too many updates since the last board meeting, though I am happy to announce that all of ALRB's budget change proposals have been submitted and are currently under review for consideration by the Department of Finance for this upcoming budget cycle. Final decisions on those proposals should be upcoming in the next month or so, with the budget change proposals that are approved becoming public on January 10th with release of the governor's budget. That's pretty much all I have for now. Happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to you and all the staff for your work on those. Very proud of those submissions, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about them more in January if approved. Next, I will turn back to Chief Board Counsel Ratchen for the legislative report.
Okay, so since the last meeting on September 28th, the governor approved and signed Assembly Bill 2183. So the bill makes a number of changes to the act that will take effect on January 1st. With respect to election proceedings, the bill will establish a process by which employers can register to abide by the terms of a labor peace compact for a particular calendar year, and for employers who do so choose, certain labor organizations would be able to avail themselves of mail ballot election procedures to become a certified bargaining representative. And for employers who do not register to be bound by labor peace compact requirements, certain labor organizations may become certified through procedures allowing the use of authorization cards without a secret ballot election. The other provisions of the bill, changes to the act, allows the board to assess civil penalties against employers who commit unfair labor practices, and establishes bonding requirements for employers who seek to challenge board decisions involving an award of a monetary remedy. When signing the bill, so this bill will take effect January 1st. In signing the bill, the governor also announced an agreement on a bill that will be proposed during the next legislative session. So we'll be keeping our eye on that. There's a report available on the website that provides links to the 2183, which will take effect, and then also the proposed language to be included in a bill clarifying provisions of 2183 in the next legislative session. So I'll just leave it at that if there's any questions.
I do not have any questions at this time, but appreciate all of your work these past few months providing technical assistance. It was very helpful to me and to others, I know. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments? Okay. We do not have a regulations report, so we are wrapping up our business portion a bit earlier, so our staff are checking to see if our panelists are available. If you can just give us one moment, we are going to work to get them, and we'll hopefully start the panel a little bit earlier than we anticipated.
Chair Hasid, I just submitted one of our panelists.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. So I wanted to, our panel today is on farm worker mental health issues, and I'm so grateful for our panelists that are able to join us today to help give an introduction on this topic. general healthcare issues and for farm workers are something that's been a personal interest of mine. I think, as we all have seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's exacerbated a number of health issues, but there's been a growing discussion and awareness around the mental health issues that it has made more acute. And as we know, farm workers, being essential workers, are really on the front lines for so much. They are on the front lines for COVID-19. They're on the front lines for the impacts of climate change on our health. And I've been curious and frankly worried about the intersection of this with mental health and exacerbating some of those issues, and then coupled with the problems of lack of access, both because of geography. We know we have more limited healthcare options in our rural areas, and then as well as other barriers that we discuss, whether it be stigma, whether it be financial resources, or other issues that impede the ability of workers to get the care that they need, and hopefully mitigate some of the issues and challenges that they face. Additionally, we've just seen, whether it's COVID-19 or not, an increase in mental health issues among the general public. Health officials recently recommended that all adults, basically ages 8 to 65, be screened for anxiety and depression. That came out in the last few weeks. As we talk about commemorating days, Monday was also Mental Health Day. So I thought it would be appropriate to get an introduction to this topic and develop a better understanding, because it impacts the population that we serve, and certainly impacts and affects their working conditions, which directly relates to our work. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Adrienne, also who goes by Annie Keeney, who is an assistant professor with San Diego State's School of Social Work, who has done a great amount of research in this area, and I'm very excited to learn about some of her more recent research. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Annie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen if that is okay. And then
Please do.
I have what, about 10 minutes? I will talk fast.
Sure. If you go to 15, Annie, we will appreciate it.
Okay.
Due to a confluence of things today, we were not able to have all of our invited panelists, so we do have a little bit more time. So.
Okay. Let me just, and I want to say a shout out to those that have your video. I'm very much a visual person, so I appreciate having your video on so I can see like at least the head nods and whatnot, because I need that feedback. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? No.
We can't hear in the boardroom.
Yeah, not yet.
I'm not seeing it on
You
the
should be
platform.
able to share your
Okay, let's
screen,
try-
Annie. I
let's-
set our Zoom.
Okay,
There it goes.
can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
You see
lovely
my-
family.
You see my family. Okay, wonderful. All right, let's try this. Okay, can you see this? All right, perfect. Great.
Yes.
All right, well, so thank you again for your time this morning. My name is Annie Keeney, and I will be chatting with you today about a recent study that we focused on examining mental health risks and occupational stressors in farm workers in a US-Mexico border region. The topics we will discuss today, very briefly, I'm just going to give you a little bit of like my informal and professional background, a little deep dive into Imperial County's agriculture, and then our research findings that we looked at, this kind of the focus of the study, some of our methods, findings, and then recommendations. And if we have time, I can certainly answer or attempt to answer some questions. So can you guess what part of Washington I grew up in? So I'm trying to kind of set my informal background piece. But I grew up in the area that's seriously no idea. And so a part of Washington that's about a town of about 4,000 people. The nearest target's 2 hours away. In 2019, the median income for an individual is about $23,000. And most of the occupations in my county were agricultural and forestry related. And so this very rural, highly ag dominant region I spent growing up, and the many ill outcomes that related to just the family and individual well-being that surrounded my community heavily influenced my decision to set out on a journey that would not only allow me to be a social worker, a practicing social worker, but then someday hopefully influence the design and implementation of service delivery policies. I was a first generation college student in my family when I left in about 2002 to pursue my undergraduate degree. So I received my bachelor's from Eastern Washington in Cheney, and then I continued at Eastern for my master's in social work. And then after earning my MSW, I moved to the Tri-Cities, so the area that is designated as hops and not much else on my informal map of Washington, to be a behavioral therapist for the Pasco School District. And the Pasco School District was predominantly Hispanic Latino, and more than 75% of my students qualified for free and reduced lunch. And while I was there, I witnessed firsthand how the occupation of my students' parents created barriers that impacted their academic and behavior success in ways that other occupations did not. Like, for example, seeing my students not being excited for spring break only because they knew that they were going to have to go out to the fields with their parents to work, and they'd rather be in school. So these experiences led me to pursue my PhD in social work at Colorado State, where I was a graduate research assistant for the High Plains Intermountain Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. And then I was hired by High Cause as a remote research assistant when I graduated with my PhD in 2017. And all of this, informal and professional background really set the foundation for pursuing a position at SDSU, where I'm currently at, and deeply interested in the US-Mexico border area, as there's a vast amount of people, children, and families and individuals that rely on agricultural production. And I'm sure most of you know that the US-Mexico border region populations are 5 times more likely than other counties statewide and nationwide to work in agriculture. So my work is really aimed towards impacting service delivery systems by enhancing the safety net of chronically underserved communities. So before I get further along, I really do want to take a minute to acknowledge the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. They provided the funding mechanism for the study to happen, and then also for acknowledging the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition, who were fabulous partners in this research for the recruitment of farm workers, and then helping with the dissemination of findings as well. So I want to set the stage for this presentation with a quote from Thomas Jefferson back in 1785. Cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. And these words were said more than 225 years ago. The same holds true today in 2022. So farm workers are the foundation of the ag sector in the United States, providing the labor that feeds the US and beyond. However, both historically and then now amid a global pandemic, these essential workers continue to have worse health and safety outcomes than other occupations in the United States. And we saw that farm workers, again, kind of going off of the introduction, that farm workers are an increased risk of contracting and dying from COVID-19, even when other social determinants of health are controlled. So Imperial County, California, has the highest population of non-white residents in California, and ranks, however you want to look at it, either It ranks highest in the worst outcomes or ranks worst among California's 58 counties for social and economic factors such as injury, deaths, income inequality, unemployment, and children living in poverty. It also has the highest food insecurity in the state and the worst food environment index ranking per the USDA in the state as well. The COVID-19 mortality rate in Imperial was more than double the second highest county in the state. And early research showed that the high worker distress and the large household sizes contributed to the infection and spread. And the agricultural industry is the dominant sector within the region, within the county. Again, 5 times more likely than other counties statewide to work in agriculture. And this kind of translates roughly to about 1 in 6 jobs are directly related to agriculture in the county. So looking at just the agricultural sector alone, Imperial has generated an estimated 4.4 billion in the local economy. So kind of to put that in perspective, the scale of just Imperial's agricultural sales alone is about 10 times greater than the entire gross domestic product of the state of Vermont. So another way of looking at this massive industry is that approximately $12 million a day is generated alone from agriculture. It's also often referred to as America's winter salad bowl, as Imperial County produces more than 100 commodities, and including about 2/3 of the vegetables eaten during the winter time in the United States. Imperial is also really geographically unique as it's located on the US-Mexico border, and farmers and ranchers in Imperial depend on farm workers that can reside in Mexicali, Baja California, or also reside stateside in Imperial. So there's a big reliance on those that commute internationally, and they're considered the daytime workers, the daytime farm workers in the county, and they are definitely needed to maintain operations. So today's objective is that Hispanic and Latino workers experience high degrees of occupational stress, constitute most of California's agricultural workforce, and were among the most impacted populations with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, relatively little is known about the specific occupational stressors experienced by farm workers in the region that comprise both of those that are commuting internationally and those that are resident farm workers. So occupational stress is considered an imbalance between the demands of work and the capabilities to respond in the context of the workforce. So today's objective is really to share the type and severity of stressors found in both of these daytime and resident farm workers, and then what that means for the mental health risks of our population. So I won't go in too much into the weeds, but we collected data over 3 months between June and August of 2021 from farm workers working in Imperial County. Most of the surveys were administered in Spanish by bicultural and bilingual research assistants. We offered a $10 gift card for participants' time in answering the questions. And our research team went out to often the transportation sites or made phone calls from their farm worker database that they were helping register for COVID-19 vaccines to see if participants wanted to participate. We use the Migrant Farm Worker Stress Inventory, which is about a 39-item instrument used to measure stress. In the respondents rate each item on a 5-point scale. So it goes from 0, have not experienced, to 5, which is extremely stressful. And using the same 5-point scale, we also sought responses to two additional questions. We included, I worry about the air I breathe at work is not clean, and then sometimes I feel like I don't get enough sleep. Data were uploaded into a statistical software program for analysis. And because one of the study's goals was really just to describe the similarities and differences between the daytime and resident farm worker population, we used descriptive analysis to explore the overall characteristics, and then bivariate analysis to see correlations between the stress scores and demographic variables.
Excuse me, how many, I'm sorry to interrupt you, how many participants did you have?
Yeah, I am right there with you. You just the next slide. So we had a total of 199 Hispanic Latino farm workers working in Imperial County that participated in this survey. Most respondents indicated that their nighttime residence on work days is in the US. Yet most of the respondents were foreign born. So the overall average age of respondents was about 46 years old. Most identified as male at about almost 60%, 40% identified as female. And we had about four participants preferred not to say. We also saw that women farm workers were more likely to be US nighttime residents. So about 78% of the women versus 59% of the men were sleeping at night on stateside in the US. The average commute time for respondents, so we qualify this by the time they left from leaving their residence of where they slept to their work site. And for the overall sample was just under 2 hours. And participants whose nighttime residence was in Mexico had an average commute time of about 194 minutes compared to 72 minutes for the US nighttime residents. So again, bringing in those factors of commuting internationally, border crossings, transportation on the Mexico side, and then going through the border and customs, and then on the other side. Slightly more.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that round trip or is it the commute?
That is just in one way. So just from the work, from where they woke up in the morning to where they start their day.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
great question. So slightly more than a quarter of respondents also shared that they had tested positive for COVID-19. So about 26% said that. And then we had about 75%, 74% of respondents reported receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. So a very high amount, but this is also take into account that our partnership with the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition, part of their initiative was to register farm workers for the COVID vaccine. So they had established trust within the farm working community. So we can see that I don't know that this statistic of our 74%, it might not be the exact same across other farm worker populations because of that caveat. So with our migrant stress inventory scale, a score is obtained by summing up all the scores for the items. And the possible range can go from 0 to 156, and higher scores mean a greater degree of stress related to the farm worker lifestyle. The tool, the instrument, has a cutoff score of 80, which means that if you have a score of 80 or more, is really indicating that that individual may have stress levels that pose significant mental health, clinical mental health risks. 40% of our sample had a score of 80 or more, which indicates the stress levels that our farm workers were experiencing have very significant, are presenting with clinical mental health concerns, very significant ones. And We also found that those farm workers with higher stress scores were more likely to be born in Mexico. So we saw, foreign born as a real contributing factor to perceived higher stress scores. So about 42% of the sample were foreign born were having high scores of 80 or more, compared to 22% of the farm workers that were US born. So out of all the stressors that we assessed for, these were the top 10 stressors between both the commuting and the residential farm workers in Imperial. So sleep was a huge stressor. We had being away from family members, bad weather, no access to medical care, working long hours, communicating in English was a stressor, people using drugs, their children's education, the air quality, and bathroom conditions. These were the top 10 stressors that we found. We found that because we were kind of thinking that there would be differences among the commuting farm workers and the resident farm workers. And despite those similar and cultural characteristics, our results really showed that age and country of birth could predict greater stress levels associated with farm worker lifestyle than nighttime residents. And this finding really supports research on the enduring impact of experiences for citizenship, language, and cultural barriers as foreign-born workers residing in Mexico and the US were more likely to report elevated stress levels. I do want to note that the top stressors did vary a little bit between the groups, with Mexican nighttime residents more likely to experience stress associated with the lack of sleep, and US nighttime residents expressed stress from weather and air quality as their number one stressor. And we can kind of see how the differences in commute time might have influenced the stress of lack of sleep as well. So what's really interesting is we took these 10 stressors and we kind of we're like, where did they all fall? And they fell into really these two categories of working conditions and the working environment. Conditions are typically associated with how a person physically or mentally feels, whereas the environment can mean the immediate surroundings of person, including like nature, people, and climate. And of interest was that our findings indicated that others' drug use, substance use, either alcohol and drug use, was a visible part of the. Oh, I am so sorry, my dog heard barking.
I can't hear them. If it makes you feel any better.
Okay, good. They like to bark. I told them to be good. Sorry about that. Life of Zoom. But of interest was that the substance abuse was a visible part of their work environment, like air quality and bathroom conditions. So there's, we really feel there's an increased concern not only for farm workers' own substance use, but also the secondhand effects of substance use that can contribute to an overall unsafe or unhealthy work environment at agricultural field sites or the transportation sites. So we really encourage additional research on those exposures to substance abuse within farming populations. I want to say that this study really has increased our understanding of how fundamental worker and human rights are needed to support precarious workers' overall health and safety in the agricultural sector. Prior to even the COVID-19 pandemic, the International Labor Organization asserted that safe and healthy working conditions are essential for decent work. And zooming into Imperial County specifically, mental health remains a very low priority in the region. There's about one mental health provider per 660 residents. So again, thinking of just those that are living stateside, which is about 2.4 times higher than the state average ratio. So we encourage farm and ranch employers in the Valley to really take steps to support substance abuse resources and treatment proactively. By doing so, we think that employers in the U.S. border region may see a reduction of the secondhand effects of substance abuse, thus, creating a safer, healthier, and more productive work environment that has the potential to increase profits significantly. For example, within the agricultural industry, it is estimated that the per capita cost to employers for each untreated worker with a substance abuse disorder is about $2,689. And given the scale of the region's agricultural operations and the required workforce needed to maintain those operations, cost savings could be in the billions. Just in 2000 alone in Texas, the estimated cost of lost productivity for Texas farm workers due to alcohol and drug use was $11.2 billion. So I could see, and that was 22 years ago, this finding in Texas farm workers. So I can see that translated as a cost benefit for increasing profits here, even in the Valley. So we have I just want to highlight a couple policy practice and policy implications. Because some stressors are not going to be easily improved on. We cannot improve, right, the weather in Imperial County, which can be very, very hot. But some stressors could be easily improved on. And it's crucial that, local farming associations advocate for efforts to reduce those stressors within their control. So, for example, advocating for improving or increasing bathroom conditions and capacities in the field could really improve health and safety of farm workers. I didn't share the qualitative findings because we also did a deep dive into about 12 workers and did a qualitative analysis. And this theme came up again of bathroom conditions. And I think it's just part of the heat. And then I do know that a lot of the bathroom facilities are contracted out. So that's just, something that those those associations and farmers and ranchers can keep an eye on to really improve that. As bathroom conditions was a top third, it was in the top third of stressors for all respondents. So male and female, commuting and resident. And it could be a really a realistic stressor that employers could address that could have immediate positive implications for their workforce. We also really credit community outreach in Spanish as positively impacting the vaccination rates among the region's farm worker and protecting them there. As such, we really recommend investing in more Spanish language access to routine public health information and targeted behavioral health campaigns to help essential workers navigate stressors. And so we could see this, within the field sites, but also in the transportation sites as well. And if resources on substance abuse could make, we feel that resources on substance abuse or, coping with the stressors of witnessing other substance abuse could really make meaningful improvements in the lives of the workforce here. So this QR code, if you're fancy with a smartphone, you can take a picture or, hold up the camera function onto the QR code and you can get an access. It's an open access journal that we published on the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. That's the whole study. And there's a wealth more of information there. We also have another study that we dissected just looking at the female farm workers, which I'm happy to share with the board for dissemination as well. this was our research team. So just, a shout out to all of the team that helped make this possible. We had Dr. Amy Quant, who was the co-investigator, Daniela Flores and Luis Flores were our Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition co-founders and community partners that just did a phenomenal job and just further support the need that you have to have trusted community organizations to help reach really hard to reach populations. And then not pictured is was my graduate research assistant, Mercy Villasenor, who was an Imperial County MSW student. So I hope I talked fast enough, but I have, if there's any time, I can certainly answer questions, but my contact information is here. Happy to, get an email from you all, and I can maybe further of assistance in some way. Thank you.
Yes, we do have several questions here in the room. I know Board Member Broad, you had a question, then Member Lightstone, and I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I have a question in Imperial County. We see a very large percentage of farm workers in California are now indigenous people whose first language is not Spanish, but an indigenous language, whose supervisors often are Spanish speaking, supervising people who are basically non-Spanish speaking. And we also just collectively in the whole population just saw that there may be some significant tensions within the Latino community between indigenous people from Mexico and Central America and the other people in the Latino community. So I just wondered, in Imperial County, is the farm worker population also increasingly indigenous, and were the views of indigenous people reflected in your study?
Great question. Thank you. So we did ask where the country of birth was, and the vast majority were Mexico born. We did see a couple Central American countries there, but not enough, again, that we can really just look at the mainly Mexico born workers. And so I think that's also just part of the fluidity there. But I think what you're speaking of is certainly an issue in other parts of the ag community nationally, and maybe even in other parts in California as well, because the dialects are vast there. But we didn't see any of that contention, dynamics out within the qualitative interviews. We really actually found more of just that workers, again, because they spend so much time with each other, that it was, they looked at it as family and like supporting their work family. So it did seem a very, from like a resilient, supportive stance, but certainly I could see how that could be an issue in other areas as well, but that didn't come out in the data for Imperial County.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. Is the farm worker population in Imperial County, whether they're residing at night and commuting from Mexico or reside in Imperial County, is it more of a permanent, a sort of a permanent worker population that's there and part of the community all the time, or is it a migrant farm worker population?
That's a great question. I want to say it's both and. So we have a significant amount because of the climate there that you can, there is often year-round work there. So we do certainly see workers that stay there, and potentially they could go into another, if the field season ended, they might still continue to stay in Imperial County, but maybe go into housework for the off season or something along those lines. But then there are also a handful of people that will follow crops and migrate, right? And then and come back. Some of our workers had been working the same crops for decades. So there's a lot of that. And then there's also a lot of mixed documentation statuses within the households. So, and depending on where they fall on that continuum, sometimes their children are state born, but because they're considered a migrant status, then they are required to go and move for a little bit and follow a crop, whereas some other families might attempt to maybe go back and commute from Mexicali and over again. So it's a very unique geographic location.
Thank you.
Member Lightstone?
Sure. Thank you. A very interesting presentation you've done for us and the research. I have one question I want to ask you. When you talk about concerns of workers about drug abuse by other people, sort of the secondary effects, I'm wondering if your survey tracked what crop they worked in and whether they got group piece rate or not, because it seems like if I have a colleague that is having an alcohol or drug problem, it might affect safety in the field, but it might also affect the group earnings if it's a group piece rate. So I guess my question is, did you look at the payment system?
Well, you are framing my next avenue of research for sure. That is exactly where I want to go with that. We didn't, because I was surprised for this finding, right? And so I want to build on that and further understand the harms that are being described within that context, and essentially also what is a substance that's being used often or providing, some of those unsafety things, and then looking at, is it by piece? What are the experiences that are happening? Is it because they're doing these kind of things because I'm mad because it's impacting the work of the group, right? And so I have to catch up and do more work, or is it they're just very unstable individuals? They might still be doing their work, but just kind of is more like I'm a walking on eggshell environment, right? And that's providing some of that harm that's there. I also, as a caveat, I want, there are, across everybody, there's, stigma associated with substance abuse, stigma associated with mental health pieces. So I often, in talking to my research assistant, she made a note. She's like, this is really interesting because I would ask these questions and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's stressful. But, I kind of participate in drinking drinking on the field too. Right. And so I don't know where that line is of witnessing other people and that stress, or, also engaging in that activity, and that's stressful as well. But I also know that the work is ridiculously hard. And substance use and all those things can often be used as pain management, and when you don't have any access to healthcare and other avenues, what does that all look like? So yes, that is really where I'm wanting to go, is further understanding those pieces. And we also know that there's a lot of research that the Western Center has done on looking at like sexual harassment pieces in the field, especially for female farm workers. And I wonder if there's a correlation there between, of the stress associated with that harm and substance use that might be happening in the field or at the transportation sites.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Isidore.
Yeah, just a quick question. I saw that air quality was one of the issues, but then I also saw that the asthma rating was only at 5%. Can you explain that to me?
So say that one more time.
I saw that the air quality was a top issue, but then I also saw that asthma was significantly low at 5%.
So yes, so it's kind of interesting. And so again, of, and that's, self-reported chronic conditions. So if you don't have access to be able to have that diagnosed, that can certainly reduce, what is being reported or not. We kind of argue or speculate because most of those air quality pieces came from US residents, or US residing, that we think that the little bit more increase in access to primary care and things like that have been able to maybe influence those pieces. Within the air quality on a whole, though, the children in Imperial County have the highest, and it's off the charts compared to the rest of California, highest rate of child asthma. And so often that air quality could be certainly a identified stressor, but could be of concern for other family members, opposed to that personal piece. And then there's also the Salton Sea. So I'm not, I can't deep dive into the geography of it, but there's a lot of the Salton Sea and the other pieces in there of the air and the pesticides that all kind of constitute within the air quality of the environment.
Would you be following up in that area, trying to figure out ways to mitigate that?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one, right? And there is a lot of research. My world kind of falls in that mental health piece, but there is a lot of research that looks at, air quality pieces within agricultural communities and worker health. And what was interesting in one of my interviews was the individual was like, I like wearing a mask. I know it's COVID, but, I have to do it because of COVID, but I've actually liked it because of the air quality. I felt like I could breathe better. But then other workers are like, well, I don't like working in the mask because it's so hot and it's, very cumbersome on your face. And so it really brings the question of making sure workers have protective equipment, right? The PPE that's needed to protect themselves. And then it's a systematic response, certainly, I think, within that. And it would be interesting if we had, some of those medical assessments, because I would argue that probably reported asthma would go up if we had access to, or those workers had access to a primary care physician to assess and maybe diagnose.
Thank you.
Board Member Flores, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I had a couple of questions. My first question is, what constitutes bad weather? I know we often deal with extreme heat, but in the Imperial Valley, I also, you mentioned that it's kind of the winter salad bowl for the country. I'm assuming there's also extreme cold. So just one, what constitutes bad weather? And then two, kind of following up on that, is there maybe a little bit more context to the stress that is informed by bad weather? Is it you're stressed because the bad weather can have a negative impact on your health or your production, et cetera? Just wanted to see if you could break that down a little bit more.
Yeah, great question. So the bad weather is really what we found is the extremes of it. So the extreme heat, and then what was the rain. So there might not be a ton of rain there, but when it rains, it rains, or the rain might not be super heavy, but it certainly impacts the working environment, right? It impacts the field, soil, all of those pieces. So so it's kind of the extremes of that weather. And then what I could kind of dissect from the qualitative interviews was just the need to, prepare to have like the right equipment, the right clothing for the weather, and then the stress of just working not in ideal conditions. And so oftentimes we've seen their shifts start really, really early, right? To try to mitigate some of the hot weather exposure, but then that also puts on stress because then now they have very awkward hours, right? That impact their ability to, say, be at their kids' school conference, right? Because they're going to be working in off hours. So it's a very systematically complex piece of like how the bad weather can impact them. So either the working conditions and then also just like actual working conditions, but then also the behaviors or what they have to do to help mitigate those conditions and what that means for other aspects of their life.
Yeah, and that kind of informs this other thought that I had, because I know for US residing workers, and I believe the slide said that the kind of bigger stressors were air quality and bad weather. But I also thought, if you're US residing workers, one, what does that mean in terms of your family composition? Does that mean that you're residing with your nuclear family, or, is there family that resides in the US and then family that resides elsewhere? And, thinking about, it was listed as one of the top 10 stressors in terms of relationships with families. So thank you for expressing that, because I think it does kind of all inform and build off of one another, where it is going to have an impact on different aspects of your life. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question.
And I see General Counsel Julie Montgomery has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Wondering where you see the next steps or effects of this research. So are there efforts underway to increase access to mental health care services? I think obviously too, this could help inform stakeholders where some problems that need to be resolved and that could possibly alleviate some of these stressors. But just wondering on the issue of access, I've worked advocating for farm workers for many years and just seen that there's a real lack of access everywhere. And just even if people can get to a provider, there's just so few providers that are culturally competent and speak the languages and whatnot. So where do you see this going?
Absolutely. Great question. So we, as you probably know, we need a multi-system rehaul or reform. I mean, that there's just not one concrete answer on how we can increase that access, right? With where I'm going, one is, just being very, very specific and just like, advocating for the stressors that might be in control that we can help impact, right? The bathroom conditions, things like that. Also being very mindful of, right, the stigma that's associated with it, the lack of access, all of those pieces. And so I'm taking an approach of really trying to make it more of a first as a step, as a more of a universal, discussion awareness type piece, right? So providing, what little access there might be, to resource linkages, but also because I'm working with a colleague too, and this is kind of our next steps of building off of this. And she's an expert in Hispanic and Latino mental health, is really trying to develop the capacity within the community. So we have promotores, we have other pieces there. We have farm workers that do this decades, right? Decades, decade after decade, they are there. And so we're really trying to cultivate, figuring out the programming and the needs that we can do to cultivate the community to help with this, again, because it's going to reduce the distress that happens within these systems, get the access that they need. And some of it could just be very, basic needs that aren't being met, but they certainly contribute to the stress and then further impact the mental health piece, right? So kind of taking that approach. And then what's also, I know, very tricky is for our exclusion or acceptability of getting access to programs, right? Often is contingent on having a social security number or those pieces. And so that excludes a significant amount of people to get the services that are very, very vital. So I will put on my soapbox of, funding those nonprofit community-based orgs and providing more of those resources to them, like the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition. I mean, we're just phenomenal in building the trust, getting the information out to those farm workers. It is huge. And I don't know if we can really make that big of an impact in other systems that aren't including the big effort being on those community-based orgs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And if you're able to stick around, there may be some other questions or comments later on, but I do want to get to our next panelist, who I understand is here, and really appreciate your presentation. And obviously, if you have to go, we understand that too. Really grateful for your time and for your work, and interested to read the report more in full. Next, I have Thea Rittenhouse, who is the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Chief Farm Equity Advisor. And she really helped us, as I was trying to explore, get more information about various programs and initiatives that at the state and federal level that address mental health issues for particularly the labor workforce, but as well as within the industry as a whole. She really helped explain some of those efforts and sort of gave me a good grounding in some of these things. And I want to turn it over to her so she can share that information with the board and with our other participants today. Thank you, Thea, and thank you for your patience. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Good morning, everyone. Really great to be here and take a few moments to just talk briefly about some of the things that the Department of Food and Agriculture is doing with regards to farm worker mental health. And I don't have a presentation today. I will share a resource of a web page that we created as a part of a project, but just have a few minutes of discussion and overview and hope to answer any questions that you might have. Certainly, CDFA as a whole doesn't have a lot of farm worker centered programs. And when I joined the department in 2018, really, and throughout COVID, really, tried to help various efforts to reach the farm worker community and to provide resources and really build upon some of the themes and struggles that we were seeing within the farm worker community. And there was an opportunity to apply for a USDA NIFA grant. They've been doing Farmer Rancher Stress Assistance Network, FARSAN for short. They've had grants available throughout the country for the last several years. And typically those grants were open to nonprofit organizations. And now within the last year, they were opening it up to state departments of ag, or state departments of ag. So we applied for the program and were accepted. It was only a 1-year project, $500,000. And really what we wanted to do was to build upon the existing networks that existed along the West Coast with the Western Farmer Rancher Stress Assistance Network, and try to bring some more resources and information about mental health and where to get help to California. And so our grant partners because we did get an extension for 1 additional year. Our grant partners are UC Davis AgriAbility Program, which was already running and leading one of the co-leads for the Western Farmer Rancher Stress Assistance Network. Also CSU Fresno, the Community Valley Foundation. And we also partnered with the Health and Human Services Agency, which runs the Cal Hope program. And really partnering with them in order to develop some materials in languages other than English to be able to provide for farm workers. And so after 1 year, we really have done a few things and are thankful we have another year. But one thing became really apparent, and Annie really touched on a lot of those really primary things that are needed. We did hold some webinars where we invited many different farm worker organizations and other groups who might be serving farm workers for more information. And we had just like over 100 people at each webinar, and we only were able to have a few, and we're hoping to have a few more. But the main things that came out of those webinars where we talked about some of the needs were those things like Andy mentioned: stigma, trust. In fact, we really focused on naming this vitamin T. Our facilitator was talking about how that's like the key factor, and really supporting and building the networks that already exist, promotoras and others who are serving and addressing stigmas and other barriers that still continue to exist. And additionally, really importantly, the lack of information in languages other than Spanish. So really trying to focus on those other languages that are spoken in the farm worker community. And so for the very short amount of time we have to extend the project, we decided to use the majority of that funding to develop some more materials in those Indigenous languages and offer some more opportunities for discussion and conversation in those other languages. This isn't a long-term funding source, so we're trying to balance, what things we can really do within this time, and maybe move us one tiny bit closer to, getting people opportunities to network and get to know each other and learn some strategies, because that also did come up quite a bit. So that's really the main project. We did have a lot of media campaigns. We did through the CalHope side of the project. So we developed brochures, we did radio spots, we promoted the new mental health crisis line, the 988 number that's available now nationwide, but it's available in English and Spanish. And so we are making that information available as much as we can. We know this is really the tip of the iceberg, but as a statewide agency, we're trying to do what we can with this limited pot of money to try to at least bring people together and to develop some materials that will exist beyond the duration of this project. I will share my screen if I'm able to do that, I think, to show you what the web page looks like. And I will also put it into, am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to, Thea. And if you'd like to send via chat the URL, I'll share it to everyone.
Why don't I do that? I'll just send it via the chat. So we developed a webpage in English and Spanish, and you are welcome to view it here. It has lots of different resources and information about who to contact. Of course, the Western Farmer Rancher Stress Assistance Network meets quarterly. It's a really great group of individuals, organizations, researchers all along the West Coast, and they exchange a lot of information. They did a survey recently also of organizations who work directly with farm workers. So it's a really great group that already exists and is really trying to serve some of the needs to access to information and better understanding mental health challenges. So I'll stop there, see if anybody has any questions, but mostly just an informational presentation today.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions that I'll actually direct to both of you. One of the things I've been wondering about is where the most acute needs are. And I'll focus it, I guess, maybe I'll focus it on the farm worker population, but if it's more generalized, let me know. Is it in identifying like how, like screening for mental illness? Is it in overcoming the stigma? Or would it be in kind of once we've gotten through those two hoops, actually getting access to the care and treatment? I feel like there's a lot of talk about just sort of like understanding, which certainly is important, but I'm wondering if getting a little more granular, if there's any aspect that's more acute or in a greater need for this population or more generally, just what you've observed.
Well, Annie is likely much more of an expert in this than I am. I'll say for our brief, outreach events that we did, certainly the stigma was something that was mentioned first and foremost, is just helping people to overcome the fear of going to seek mental health assistance and resources. And the time to do that also very important. Not having the time and the ability to do that within their work time and fear of retaliation as well. But I'll pass it to Andy because she probably has a lot more.
Yeah, both ends. So I would really, I think if we really were able to amp up the support of the basic needs that farm workers need just to survive, wages or housing, access to those pieces of just, getting healthy foods, all of those pieces, I think we would see a correlation of improved mental health. I think a lot of it has to do with the precarious work of it and the lifestyles that come with it impacting the mental health. So again, I really do feel some of the things that might seem basic, right? Like bathroom conditions would have a huge impact on the work environment and the stress. Some aspects are going to be really tricky because you have to think of, what I think Cynthia Flores was sharing too, of like the family unit and like farm work impacts all aspects of the farm family and what that means. So it could be solutions that are going to increase the mental health of the worker, but it's an intervention that's really more geared towards the children, right? So and as from a researcher standpoint, that's hard to dissect which, is it a cause or a correlation, but, looking at the stressors of the farm workers about where their children are, well, so maybe, impacting, childcare, making childcare more affordable, or doing those kind of pieces in the agricultural community might be able to help with that. But then also, keeping in mind the hours and the time that it takes to do that, and awareness, the trust piece for farmers. Because I have looked at Imperial County specifically for farmer mental health, farmer and rancher, and it mirrors very similarly the mental health risks that our farm worker population, which just is indicative of the stress that agricultural production has across the system. So within the farmer population, there's that mentality, which I think could also be translated to some of the farm worker of, I pick myself up by my bootstraps, like I'm a tough guy. These are things that I don't need help on. But there's trust, there's even distrust in the systems that farmers have, right? But there's trust in other community organizations, like their pastors, their churches. So I really feel a lot of our answer is the development and support of the already established, not reinventing the wheel, but really supporting the community stakeholders that are already there, that are trusted sources for our farmers and our farm workers, and kind of helping with the identification of it, and being able to just normalize some of the conversations around it of, like having some, referral, maybe go talk to this person or something like that, for this very unique world of agriculture.
Yeah, I so appreciate both of you and the contributions that you're making to this work. I think as we know, it's really hard. Well, some of us know it's very hard to run a business. So I have real appreciation for the growers just in running their business and some of the challenges they face, as well as they think about their workforce and how they can support them. And I don't think this is I don't think you learn how to provide good mental health resources in business school. And so as you provide resources and research so that they can better support their workforce, and make sure that they're healthy and safe, I think that's just really important and really commend both of you for your work on that. I do want to open it up to questions to my colleagues, as well as other participants in the meeting for either of our panelists. Member Brown?
Yeah, I just have a question. Has the agricultural industry stepped up to help fund programs in mental health for farmers or for farm workers? Or are they kind of like that's somebody else's problem?
I haven't heard of any specific examples, although I do know that many industry supported organizations or commodity groups were really supportive during COVID to develop resources, not specifically for mental health though. But I do think that the continuation of the USDA funds is a signal that there may be opportunities in the future to partner with grower organizations. I certainly think that would be a great direction to move into for future proposals.
Yeah, I will echo that. I mean, I love being here to elevate and further furthering this conversation, because the research has been established for decades that, farm agricultural stress and mental health for farm workers and farmers alike has been rough, right? But COVID, it kind of maybe the silver lining of COVID, it's elevated this conversation a little bit higher and has provided some funding mechanisms there. So we see that with the regional stress assistant networks that Thea was talking about. And then I've been seeing a lot of grassroots organizations. There's some really cool things that are happening in other areas like Colorado. There's a coffee break project, and it's really just bringing farmers together at a local coffee shop, and they're just talking, right? But they're providing that support, that social relationship piece, because sometimes it can be isolated work, and then that's where they're kind of providing some resource sharing. And so how we can support, or one, get aware of those initiatives, those grassroots initiatives, and then support those. But the conversation's really starting to take off, and I'm hoping that there'll be more funding for that.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Questions? I will turn to the comment queue. Do we have any questions or comments on this topic, Santiago?
Elvia Velasquez had posed a question in chat, and I'll ask her to go ahead and pose her question if she wishes here. Now you can unmute yourself to ask your question. If you're having technical difficulties, please feel free to send me a chat. Otherwise, anyone else who wishes to pose a question, please unmute yourself. And if there's several folks, we'll figure out the order.
Yeah, I'll take a moment. We can open this up for general public comment on any aspect of the meeting, and just to note that the board cannot comment or adjudicate or respond to any questions or comments about any pending matters. Please, I ask that you, if you're not speaking, please keep your devices on mute, and you can indicate if you wish to make a comment in the chat, either by writing a note or raising your hand, and Santiago will work to call on you.
Not seeing anyone at this time wishing to make a public comment or to pose their question.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Annie and Thea. I so appreciate your time and valuable work that you're doing and for taking the time to share with us and answer our questions. It was really important. And again, hope to continue to further and elevate the conversation because I think these are really important issues. And we certainly see for farm workers, especially, but for everyone, you know, you bring your personal life and your work, and you bring your work life and your personal life, and it really impacts your day-to-day well-being. And so want to make sure we can do whatever we can to support programs that help address this and keep people safe and healthy. So thank you so much. With that, we will now go into closed session. Board members, we're going to take a 5-minute break just to kind of, you know, do what you need to do, and then we'll go into closed session. And then for the public, we will then return at the conclusion of closed session for announcements and adjournment. Thank you.
Now.
Thank you, everyone. The board has now returned from closed session. We are now on to our last agenda items, which are announcements. We have a quarterly regional directors meeting today at 2 o'clock. That is the information about how to join that meeting virtually with a separate Zoom link is posted on a separate agenda on our website, alrb.ca.gov. And again, that is at 2 p.m. And then our next regularly scheduled public board meeting is currently scheduled, I want to make sure I get this correct, on Wednesday, October 26th. And we will see everyone then. Thank you. Take care.